7:30 view from the Ferris Hill.
Right.
Yeah. That's bad.
But something like that, you have to work in shoulder.
We were just.
Yeah, I was sort of the other
Lot less vendors.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the special council meeting held at the Tuesday, 5th of September 2023. I'll begin with the acknowledgement of the Kaurna people. City of Prospect acknowledges that we are on the traditional country of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains region, and we pay our respect to elders past, present and emerging. We recognise and respect their cultural heritage, beliefs and relationships with the land, and we acknowledge that they are of continuing importance to the Kaurna people living today. I'll now read the council pledge. We seek wisdom and understanding as we face the duties of our united task, praying for the peace and prosperity of our city. Okay, let's get into it. Item 1 on the agenda. Opening item 2 on leave is nil. 3 nil apologies. 4. Are there any declaration by members of a conflict of interest?
So this is not the one to do with the tennis club and the plans. No, that's not it. That's not it. All right.
Okay, moving on now to reports.
It is, sorry, yeah, it is. So, sorry, going back.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
So I declare a general conflict as a committee member, but not an office bearer of Prospect RSL Club. But I'll manage this conflict by staying in the meeting and voting.
Thank you. Item 5, reports for decision. There's only one on the agenda tonight. Item 5.1. Tennis precincts grant funding update, recommendations on page 2. Do I have a mover? Try again. Recommendations on page 2. Would anyone care to move the motion to get it onto the floor? Councillor Barnett, would you like to talk to the motion?
No,
Do I have a seconder?
can't second it either.
Do I have a second? Would anyone like to second the motion? Okay, no seconder, so the item lapses.
So what's that?
That being the case, is there anyone who'd like to put up an alternative motion?
I have some questions, but I'll move it to get on the table just so we can vote on it.
So you're seconded.
Yes, I don't really want to, but I will. And sorry, I'm just struggling with technology struggling with me. I'm not sure which. So I had a couple of questions. So the first question is, and apologies if that has been covered in the report, I couldn't see it. What consultations happened with the RSL the last couple of months regarding this, particularly in terms of the space that's been picked up into the side of the side, and how close is that to the cemetery and the flagpole, and are they still usable for Anzac Day?
So yeah,
Mr. Galena, if you could come forward and answer this question, please.
For you, hello. We've met with the RSL on a couple of occasions. Neil's here as an observer, but he was part of one of the meetings that we attended with the RSL. In terms of they've got details in regards to what we're proposing, we will require the removal of those pine trees behind the memorial. There is no impact on the actual centre. No impact on that, but the fencing comes pretty much right up to the back of it within a few hundred mil, and 400 mil, remember that vicinity. The intent is to be able to provide a green screen still behind there through a climbing vine or something similar within the actual fence itself. So we've met with them, worked through that. There wasn't any significant dissent or concern with what we're proposing, and we'll begin working with that to get to the final the detail behind.
Mr. Delaney, just perhaps to add some meat and bones of that, did you discuss with the RSL their views on the difference between an option of potentially moving the cenotaph and retaining it, but with the close setback? And did they prefer one option or the other?
I don't believe that came into the conversation. They were comfortable maintaining the position where it was effectively. Pretty pleased that we weren't going for the ninth court option, which was on the table previously, with respect, which would require the war memorial to be relocated, albeit under the master plan, it would be relocated to effectively where the existing RSL hall is, and that would have to be relocated. So I think that overall they were pleased with where we got to with the eighth court. Ideally, it's obviously pretty close to the fence line in terms of where it sits. So hoping to soften it up with some vegetation, and all parties were reasonably were satisfied with that outcome.
If I can, just another couple of questions. So you said it's within 40 mils of the, as described in the plan, the monument, we'll call it that. The monument 40 mils. Is that including any green coverage behind it?
400 mil.
Oh, sorry, 400 mils. Sorry,
Yeah.
yeah. 400.
Mr. One,
So you're talking 40 centimeters, just.
Mr. One.
So that's effectively the space that would be available for any green coverage. So effectively a climbing, effectively there's a ficus pumila or some sort of ivory or otherwise that would effectively climb up the fence line. That's what we've proposed, what we've discussed with tennis club, what we've discussed both with the RSL.
And in terms of the flag poles, are they still going to be usable by standing behind them?
So, Mr. Winner.
If I may, I might deflect that one back to our project manager across the detail. I can't recall it specifically. So Sam Wellington, senior project manager, City Prospect.
Yeah, I can't remember if it's exactly 400 mil from the back of the cenotaph to the fence, but there was enough space for a little garden bed and something to grow up the fence where you can still get behind the cenotaph. The footpath from that space will go, and we're proposing to extend the paving around the front. So the footpath essentially comes, what direction is that? East slightly as well. So it's still a usable space for Anzac Day. And I think that was really important. Whether we can stand directly behind the flagpoles or to the side of the flagpoles, I'm not quite sure. I need to get the drawings up and have a look, but they were designed in a way that they were still usable. So that was one of the key things we were looking at.
My concern is probably less whether it's behind or in front of the side, so as long as it's usable. So here it is, so that's positive. So my second question just really relates to the funding line. I was just a bit concerned about bringing forward money from another project. It doesn't guarantee that money for the second project. And we've seen this before, where there's lots of great intent and good feelings about we'll just bring that to the budget next year, but the next year's budget's next year's budget. There's no guarantee of that. So I'm a little bit concerned about that. I do presume, and maybe I ask this as a question, that this money will only be committed if the grant funding is also received. If grant funding is not received, that this money will go back into the file.
So can you confirm?
So, look, again, this all comes back to members. If the grant isn't received, we'll be coming back to you to confirm that, yes, we won't be proceeding. Members, the conversations we had during the budget process made it fairly clear to me, and certainly my interpretation of the adoption of this budget was that it was subject to grant funding being received, and that we would not proceed unless that grant funding was received. And my understanding, subject to Mr. Delena correcting me here, is that this report makes it fairly clear that one of these two projects, which were both contingent, i.e. Broadview and Prospect, one of these projects has a far better chance than the other one, which is quite unlikely to receive funding based upon current progress, which is why the recommendation is being made that, and of course cost escalation as a factor. Mr. Delena.
I think you're spot on, Chris, through the match. The other aspect is Broadview is not going to be at a state where we're going to be able to progress to the grant application, and the way that it's materialising through the design, it's going to be nigh impossible to be able to carve out a scope of works that was probably originally proposed in terms of just developing 6 courts now in a manner that would integrate with the future design state for the master plan. So what that means is the current courts, and we've only just received the design, a very early design yesterday, might be this morning actually, effectively has this new court halfway through the existing conference in Broadview. To be able to create that central walkway that's proposed in the master plan. There's more details in the workshop next. There's certainly information in this report that talks to that. And we've had conversations with Broadview about this as well.
Yeah.
And they understood and were banging the table screaming up and down, but certainly understood where it was at. It made more sense that this project come forward.
So, Mr. Delano, sorry, just to add meat to the bones there, we will talk about this in the workshop around the challenges that presents potentially for staging the project at Broadview.
Yeah, there will be, there's some slides in that space. Thank you.
Okay, so look, from my perspective, of course, having the workshop would have been optimal or less bad than before we have this conversation. Because for me, I don't understand what board is looking like yet in order to sort of be comfortable enough to effectively give us a budget allocation for this year. Understanding, of course, we won't have to go this year, the grant funding outside of Prospect may not be available as well. I understand both those things, but you know, there's been to and fro between both tennis clubs over the last probably three or 4 years in terms of we're putting budget up, we don't get grants, we look back and then kind of nothing gets done, and I'm concerned about that as an outcome as well for both. So I'm not quite sure how I'm going to vote on this one yet, to be honest, because I'm interested in going down the debate around the table. I'm just not quite sure which way I go. I'm uncomfortable about giving up the money unless we've got some guarantee of this next budget. No one can provide that guarantee. Every elected member could probably say, yes, we're going to do it, but there could be another priority that comes on and we take it off the table. So it's an empty promise from all of us to be able to do that tonight. Although hopefully it would be an intention to still get money in the next budget. I'm a little bit uncomfortable with it being so close to the RSL memorial. I like the other proposal, which was actually moving it out altogether and come out the night. That might have been a better option, but anyway, I'll listen to the debate intently and make up my mind as to how. And could we, I will ask, can we take in parts, please?
Certainly. Okay, is there any further discussion? Councillor Rebecca.
Yeah, I'll be looking to take it in parts as well. There's a couple of things in this one. One is the huge increase in the cost. It's a massive increase. And so I briefly rang, some people to make them aware of this. I couldn't get hold of the Broadview Tennis Club, but I understand I've spoken to you last Thursday. And I don't know if they understand the gravity of this is maybe not necessarily going to be available in the next budget. That's my concern in voting for this. I'm more of a feeling to leave it on the table and to come back. There's another couple of points I'm going to raise. Is that the other thing at point 7 endorses staff to work with Prospect Tennis Club and associated coaching in regards to the lease agreement and fee structure. Now, I know elected member body have been asking for a leasing and licensing policy that's fair, transparent, so everyone around the table can see what's happening, and it hasn't come back to us. So here's another example, a bit like North Adelaide, where we've got a project, so we have to put a lease in place. Now, I think, different people will have views around the table, but one of the things is, this is predominantly used privately, as are most tennis clubs. So let's be realistic about it. However, we don't have the lease in front of us. And so my understanding of this motion puts that to staff to negotiate. Does this actually come back, probably through the chair, through the mayor, does this come back to us for decision, the lease, or is that at the discretion of the director?
So yeah.
So Mr. Delano, our plan was to negotiate a lease in principle and come back to the council for approval. Yes. 100%.
Because my feeling would be, if it is the way it's structured, more of a user pays. So if it is exclusive, there's a pay, and obviously that's not clear to the tennis club, Prospect Tennis Club, to be fair, if what we're going to charge is actually going to warrant the business model that they're proposing. So, of course, it's got to work for everyone, but I'd like to see it on par with maybe other courts around Adelaide, so that we are on par. Because I know we've got very old leases and licensing, and how the maintenance works with those as well. We don't have that in front of us for a $1.5 million project, and that's disappointing. So I'm interested to hear other people's views around the table. But yeah, there's parts of this that I want to disappoint.
Thank you, Councillor Becker. Any further discussion? Councillor Nelson.
Yeah, I think my concerns mirror Councillor De Backer's. For the last 12 months, we've been obviously debating the fact that Prospect residents, the general community don't have use of tennis courts in Prospect, whether that be Blair Athol or Broadview, Collinswood or Prospect. There's no open tennis courts for the community. I'm just not comfortable putting $1.5 million of residents' money into a facility that they can't use. And coming up here with a 0.7, the fact that we're going to negotiate the lease and licenses after we've already invested the money, I'm just not comfortable with.
Any further discussion? Councillor Nguyen.
Apologies for coming late. I missed the introduction. But just a concern that I have is about, and I don't know whether it's been raised or not, about the trees that will be removed. Has that been discussed? And if not, I'm really concerned about, these are mature, quite big trees that is worth a lot of money. So the report says that it has been removed, but it doesn't say anything about whether it be replanted somewhere. So my question is, has consideration been put towards whether we will be replanting these trees, or will it just be taken out and that's it? So, question?
Mr. Delano, would you care to repeat what you said before around the
Sorry.
lines of the fence, please?
Sure, Mayor. There isn't a solution that we can get a compliant tennis court arrangement that allows those trees to remain. The courts have to move 1.9 metres further east. We've engaged with the RSL in that space. We've got to a point where we're comfortable in the sense, ideally we want to retain them, we just physically can't do that. In terms of providing a green backdrop, I think it's important, and we're seeking to incorporate that with any design to a creeping plant of some sort, or the Ficus pumila or some other. So there's a number of options that we're looking at in that space. In terms of replanting trees, well, that's a given. That's something that we look at in terms of how we can repurpose them. Clearly, planting trees in the vicinity of tennis courts is problematic in terms of not just the nuisance that creates with respect to playing a tennis, but also about the damage it does to pavements. We just need to be mindful of that. We haven't got that level of detail. I suppose all we're looking for tonight is acceptance to lodge a grant, once in a year opportunity to lodge a grant for this exact purpose. Otherwise, we have to wait again until next year. A lot of these things can be worked through, leases can be worked through, that's the intent, and then further engagement with council. But if I don't hit this time frame by the 25th of September, there is no going back on another opportunity until next time state government decide to open this program, whatever that is.
Thank you. Anything further? Any further questions? I've got a question from the chair. So if we did this and the grant is applied for and received, is it more or less likely that a grant in the following year for another tennis club would be looked at? Or does it have any bearing or impact, or nothing at all?
I can't answer that specifically. There's the quite other than the guideline criteria, it doesn't reflect that. So in terms of the assessment, whether there's some political decision made at the time by the assessment authority in ORSA, but it's definitely not implied within the guidelines. One thing to note is that with Broadview, it's quickly been established that we're not going to be able to carve out a scope of 6 courts only and meet the intent of the master plan. It's likely to be precinct scale development that's effectively forms part of an advocacy piece with either federal or state government as part of like election pledges. That's what we're proposing moving forward. We haven't had yet the chance to have the conversation with council. Things are emerging. It was referenced in this report, that specific point. I definitely recall incorporating that within this report. That's where this is going, because we won't be able to place light poles in their future state. The courts will have to move to be halfway through the existing club rooms. It's just not going to work to develop 6 courts now within a master plan facility in that location. Spoken to Broadview, they understand that. They're really excited by the fact that there might be this opportunity for a more significant opportunity. It's an opportunity only, and it requires the future federal member or state member to pick it up as a project, but it's certainly got a good opportunity given the amount of community interfaces that this precinct hits and the number of users and members. So, to answer your question in short, there is nothing that would effectively stifle that other than potential bias in the process, noting that we don't get $500,000 under the current proposal, which will go anywhere near what this is likely to cost in the future.
Thanks. If there's no further questions, I'll head back to Councillor Barnett to sum up. Thank you.
Yes, I think that nobody's addressed, and I will ask through the mayor to the director, what will happen to the Prospect Tennis Club if this doesn't go ahead? Because my understanding is from when it's been brought to us before, previously, I think it's before the council elections, was that if they can't get the courts upgraded to the standard, then the Prospect Tennis Club won't be able to take part in the competitions. So effectively, they'll become, I guess, a social club. They won't be able to take part in the club competitions. So I don't know if the director has any information more about that.
Mrs. Delaney?
Through the mayor, that's not. That's the first I've heard of that advice, Councillor Barnett. We've been engaging with Tennis SA, engaging with the club. There's certainly no pressure in that space. We're looking at 1.9 metres over 8 courts and 1 metre additional runoff. Yeah, we're complying with the current standards. There's no implication or understanding that there's going to be reduction in the facility, the services they can provide on the current, basically the current. As it
I think
stands.
that should be followed up, because that was my understanding.
Well, if I can add this, I mean, I was advised prior to the election, and not by you, Sam, but by the previous director, that the fencing in particular was unsafe and considered not fit for purpose. There was a concern that it was not, in a useful condition. It would soon reach a point where the courts potentially were not able to be used. Now, I'm not sure, Mr. Glenn, are there maintenance issues potentially, for example, that might render the courts inoperable if we're not to do something and intervene fairly quickly, or do you have any awareness around that?
Through the chair, there'd be some minor maintenance to be required. The runoffs are not confined. The Tennis SA, when I've dealt with them over numerous other courts in my history, accept the level of risk associated through their insurer with respect to what is a minimum viable runoff. It doesn't comply with the standards, but it's a minimum viable runoff. We're not beyond that, so they're still going to continue to insure the playing of tennis and the tennis players in that facility, but it doesn't meet the standards. So yes, they would like any new redevelopment requires the standards to be met for any grant funding to be received. The only maintenance required would be some minor maintenance, some maintenance to pavements potentially, just to address the cracking, effective cracking, because there is no pavement. These tennis courts have got very little pavement below them, and they will continue to deteriorate over time because the geotechnical results we've got show there is just really nothing holding together. So.
And if I may, maybe the second part of your question, Councillor Barnett, which was around what happens if this goes down, basically.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Delano, if this goes down, what I've taken away from the report and our discussions is that we won't be able to lodge the grant application, which means the additional funding which this project requires to be viable won't be received, because if you don't apply, it's an instant no. So that would mean essentially we'd have to come back and workshop this with council later in the year and consider an approach for next year. And a degree of comfort, I guess, the council may have around a different scope of work. Maybe it's, something of a lesser scale, or maybe it is a bigger scale with more funding. We move the cenotaph, whatever members, I guess, feedback provide through a workshop. How would you see it proceeding?
I think that's the most logical way to have to go through workshop members to see what we're looking for here beyond what was the original scope, which is really a replacement of the 8 courts. I don't know the basis behind the funding that was allocated to the project, but effectively this is the current day cost for lifeline.
Can I ask one further question? Oh, sorry.
No, you have.
Can I ask a question?
Sure, of course.
On my behalf. You can
So we're talking about the Broadview Master, the Broadview Tennis Club Master Plan, talking about it being a more significant project than what we've got funding for. So what will happen with the funding that we've got set aside for that project? If it doesn't go to the Prospect Tennis Club, what are we going to do with that money if what we're looking at Broadview is a far more significant project where we use that money to achieve something, or will that money simply not be spent and
Haven't got to that level of maturity in our thinking, other than effectively could invest further funds into design development. The intent, as it currently stands, the design will be designing the courts, all of the courts, the 4 new ones, and effectively reconstruction of the existing 8 in that precinct. So it'll be effectively those courts, they'll be shovel ready, and a spatial overlay of the club room that will house both the Collinggrove and the Broadview tennis clubs. That could be worked through in greater detail to effectively a 30% design with the some of the funds. We still have a substantial balance, likely to be in the order of $700,000 that would sit there idle for council then to discuss how it might repurpose that or effectively continue to roll that over.
sorry, Councillor Barnett, anything further in your summary?
No, only, I guess that, council's receiving and noting the report. It notes the design, it supports the grant submission, and supports funding strategy. I haven't heard anybody yet that there has been indication that I think from 2 members that have spoken that they want it done in parts. So I don't know, maybe that will, put a different light on some of the things. So I think I've said enough, and we'll see what happens up. I mean, is it going to be taken in parts? Like
Yes,
two
already.
members said?
Already
Good.
agreed
All
to
right.
that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Barnett. Let's put it to the vote. So we're taking it in parts. Part 1, all those in favour? Against, carried unanimously. Part 2, all those in favour? Against, none, carried unanimously. Part 3, all those in favour? Against, motion carried. Part 4, all those in favour? Against? Motion lost. Part 5, all those in favour? Against, carried unanimously. Part 6, all those in favour? Against? Motion carried. Part 7, all those in favour? Against? Motion carried. Part 8, all those in favour? 9, we've got 9 votes. Against, carried unanimously. Thank you very much, members. Now that brings us to the close of the normal agenda. So we'll move on to the confidential item. Are we going to confidence before we turn off the?
Yes, we do need to.
Yeah. Page 4 of our agenda, item 6.1, sorry, item 5, confidential items, item 6.1. The recommendation to go into confidence. Can I have a mover and a seconder? All those in favour? Against, carried unanimously. We're just going to turn the recording off. That's blue.
I thought we should get a little thing.